Good evening. I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. Thank you for joining us this evening. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, a very special thank you. Um, Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about community and community spirit, how important it is. Every time I turn this camera on, I am humbled by the journey. I am humbled because of the outpouring of support that I receive along the way. I always advise my friends the importance of having an idea, believing in it, and executing it. I had this idea for a show. As a matter of fact, it's not totally original, but to start my own was very important. And when I started, I didn't have all the pieces. I didn't have everything that I needed. But what is very refreshing to me is in reflection to look at the journey and how far I have come. And I didn't do this alone. There are people in my life, I call them friends of CWS, who have from time to time stepped forward and have made whatever contribution, whether it's the form of moral support, form of a donation to make sure that everything that the show needs is there, is up and running. I say these things tonight because I think it's very important. I was privy to a conversation between two people today. As a matter of fact, I think I was eavesdropping. I was on the train, and they were talking about all these wonderful ideas they have, and from one to the other, they kept making excuses as to why they can't start. They don't have enough this. They don't have enough that. Some people are negative towards them, and I mean, we'll all face these things. You know, I love to cite examples of the technology we use today. You listening to me here tonight, your cell phone, we call them the smartphones today, Facebook, all these technology were once an idea, and I marvel at the courage, the determination, and persistence that it took the people who brought them into reality to pursue their dreams and to make their idea come true. And I'm always encouraged by that. I'm always encouraged by someone who has an idea and pursues it and follows it through. CWS today is possible because I don't believe in giving up. I really don't. As a matter of fact, I have no choice right now. Some of my very close friends, I'm not going to call their names, have sort of threatened me that you better not. What you're doing here is very important, not just to you, but to all of us. And so you have to continue. I'm trying to extend my introduction tonight because my guest hasn't arrived yet, and so I want to give him some time to get here. But in the meanwhile, I want to talk about an interesting development that took place over the past few months. I had started broadcasting at high definition, and for those people who have consistent and fast internet access and a powerful computer, with a good processor, that was easy for them. That's no problem. But for those who live in countries like in Africa and South America, Guyana, my country, the Caribbean, that may not always have consistent internet access, and my guest is here, so I'll take a short break. I'm back. Thank you for your patience. Our guest has arrived. Before I took the break, I was saying that I was talking about the importance of community spirit and how blessed I feel and how grateful I am that people in my circle do come forward and assist in whatever way they can. As the last thing I think I said to you was I have a very close circle of friends, some of whom have sort of threatened me if I choose to give up on CWS. I mean, jokingly, of course, but I'm making that point to say this, that it is important when you have an idea to pursue it, regardless of what it is. Many things we use today, especially technology, Facebook, smartphones, whatever. And I like to cite these examples because they're real and they're tangible and you can touch them and feel them. We would not have had access to them if the persons with the idea had given up. Do not give up. Do not, if you are constantly bombarded by those who are negative and telling you that you can't or you shouldn't, change them. It's okay. I mean, if they are real friends and you stop hanging around them for a while, they will understand. But that's one thing that I do. I do not encourage negativity. If I have a vision and I want to pursue that vision, I pursue it. And one of the things I want to say here tonight is that if you look at your video screen, you will see a number there. There are 3 numbers. And the reason for this is that I'm broadcasting in 3 different frequencies or bit rates for those of you who are technical. And this is because in the past few months or so, when I started broadcasting in high definition, certain people were not getting proper reception and fits and starts. And it troubled me because to me, without you, CWS is just pomp and ceremony. And so for our brethren in Guyana and the Caribbean and in Africa, select which number suits you. I think 360 for those of you who have slow internet access. Those of you who have faster speed, you can try 400 and high definition 480. So, without much further ado, I would like to start the show. And I would start by introducing my brother, Terrance McKnight. And this is the gentleman on the other side of the screen, right? And so I'm going to go into it. I'm just going to take give you a brief summary of his bio. Terrance McKnight is the weekday evening music host on Classical 105.9 WQXR, the most listened to classical music station in the country. He also hosts the Saturday evening program, All Ears with Terrance McKnight, a show about musical discovery, which was honored with an ASCAP Deems Taylor Radio Broadcast Award in December 2010. McKnight's musical experiences, from Glee Club soloist and accomplished pianist to professor at Morehouse College, and finally as producer and host of several music programs for public radio, have consistently championed the juxtaposition of the European classical tradition alongside the American classical tradition, such as jazz, gospel, African-American spirituals, and other musical genres. McKnight was first heard in New York in 2008 when he joined the staff of WNYC. He moved to WQXR in October 2009 upon its acquisition by New York Public Radio. Previously, he worked at Georgia Public Broadcasting, where he was creator, producer, and host of Studio GPB, a program that introduced a wide array of musical artists through interviews, live studio sessions, and commercial recordings. My brother, good night.
Hello, sir.
Thanks for coming.
You bet, man. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Terrance, let's start with the basic facts. Are you originally from Georgia?
No, I'm not. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, okay.
And after high school, I went to Georgia to go to Morehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Morehouse for undergrad. I stayed there for graduate school at Georgia State University, after which I taught at Morehouse for about 10 years. Mm. So then I left Georgia. Well, there was a year where I worked in D.C. I got my radio start at NPR in Washington. Mm-hmm. And I came back to Atlanta to start the program that you mentioned, Studio GPB. I also started the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra broadcasts around the state. And I did that until 2008 when I moved to New York City.
Quite a journey, my brother.
Yeah, it's been good.
If you weren't a radio producer, host, and host, what would you want to be?
A communicator of some sort. You know, that's what it's about for me. It's about telling stories. It's about bringing people together. So anyway, and music has always been that vehicle for me from the time I was a kid. You know, I grew up playing piano in church and, you know, playing in high school or in junior high school bands and neighborhood bands. So it was all for me about communication and bringing people together through music. So, you know, if it weren't for radio or for music, I'm not exactly sure, but it would be some sort of communication. I don't know.
So who were the musicians you admired as a kid, or when you were young, growing up?
Yeah, there was it's a kind of like a fine line between admiring and, you know, I remember my brother brought home albums because I played trumpet growing up, and he would bring home albums of Dizzy Gillespie or Louis Armstrong, and I was really intimidated by those guys, you know. So I heard Diz play, and so I tried, you know, this technique where my jaws were out. And my first teacher in junior high school said, "No, that's not the correct embouchure for playing trumpet." And then I, you know, the whole time I had been playing piano, and then my brother introduced me to, you know, Art Tatum and Thelonious Monk, and listening to those guys, I was intimidated by the way they could play. Then I picked up guitar, and I heard Wes Montgomery, and I thought, oh my goodness, these guys are just, you know, so far beyond where I am. And then when I started studying music, it made sense to me what they were able to do, because up until that point, it was a lot of ear training.
Right.
But until I really began studying form and theory, I had no idea what I was listening to. So that helped me to kind of understand the language a lot better, you know, actually going to college to study the art form.
So for any student, anybody, myself, any one of your friends included, wanting to play any musical instrument, to study music, you would advise go learn the theory, learn the mechanics of it.
Learn everything you can. Listen to everybody you can. Listen to the great musicians. Certainly go study the basics, the rudiments of any art form, I think are important. Those are the building blocks. And I think it's pretty essential to know what you're creating, to know how, you know, you came about this chord progression, to know why this melody works. You know, and I think theory kind of certainly opened my eyes to that.
Before we launch into that aspect of your life, I'm just curious to go into your timeline. What is the fondest memory of your parents?
Fondest memory of
your parents?
I think a lot about how my mother would take me to music lessons on Saturdays. She would send me to music lessons during the week. You know, I'd take piano lessons, and, you know, she would always try to find the best teachers for me. And I remember those Saturdays just driving, you know, long distances, and she would either sit in the studio and listen to me, you know, listen to my lesson, or she would, you know, go do some shopping while I was taking my lesson. So I remember that support system of her just being there, and, you know, and being in the kitchen while I'm practicing, and she would listen, you know, and she'd say, "That didn't sound right. You need to try that again." Or she'd say to me, you know, my friends would knock at the door and say, "Can you come, you know, play basketball?" And she'd say, well, you know, she'd send me to the door and say, "You've got 30 more minutes to practice." And she would also say to me, "Go outside and shovel the sidewalk. Shovel the snow from the sidewalk." And, you know, I wasn't crazy about the cold weather. So, "Oh, Mom," she said, "well, you better go practice." And so practicing for me became a way of avoiding the shoveling of the snow. So I'd sit in there and practice forever. And then, you know, I caught on to the fact that she would still make me shovel the snow after I practiced. So that was a very fond memory, because she taught me the essentials of work ethic, you know, how to work and really focusing on my work, and then having leisure time, then having the time to go, you know, play basketball with my friends or whatever. But work came first. My father was just always supportive in the background. He supported all of that.
Well, that takes me into my next question. People say that you have a friendly, warm, and easy to get along personality. And I have experienced that. I noticed that. From which of your parents do you believe you inherited most of your people-friendly traits, or is it both?
Both in a way, but certainly my mother. My father's a pastor, and so growing up, you know, it was expected that I've got 4 siblings, so it was expected that we were inviting and welcoming to people who came to our church. You know, I remember Sunday dinners, and my father and my parents would talk about, oh, who was that new person? Who was that new young person who was in service today? And so we were expected to know and expected to be able to talk about, or at least say, yeah, I went up to that person, Dad, and you know, she wants to join the choir, or she's interested in becoming an usher, or, you know, we were expected to be welcoming and inviting to people. And my mother was, although my father was pastor, she did a lot of ministering. I remember her being on the phone all the time during the week talking to these parishioners, you know, about their issues. And she was just such a great listener. And we had a large family. My father had, you know, 9 brothers. All of them were in Cleveland, and they would be at her house all the time. And my mother would just listen to all of their problems. And, you know, she wouldn't give a lot of advice, but she was just such a great listener. And because I was the youngest, I was kind of always in the background, either practicing the piano or somewhere listening to her listen.
Right.
And just watching her kind of soothe people and just being a source of comfort and solace. And so I think that's where I got that from.
Did you play the piano in church when you were?
I did. I think that was the whole goal. You know, my father wanted, you know, he wanted a children's choir, and we had, you know, from the time I think my father got to church when I was about 8 years old.
Oh.
And by the time I was 13, I was playing in church.
I don't want to assume the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it, and that is, what or who inspired you to want to become a pianist? Was it your dad? Because,
well, you know, here's how it happened. My sister was taking music lessons, and my mother made me walk to the lessons with my sister. She was my older sister, but I had to walk to the lessons with her. And so when we would come back home, my mother would say, so how was your lesson? And my sister, oh, it was great. And my mother would ask me, how was her lesson? What did she do? And I would go to the piano and I would mimic what my sister was supposed to be doing. And then after I don't know how much time, but my mother decided, well, you know, maybe I should give him lessons, because my sister wanted to grow fingernails at this time. She was about 13 years old, and she wanted her fingernails to grow, and the teacher, you know, wanted her to cut her fingernails. And so my mother decided to give me lessons. And I noticed, you know, at that time, how in church, how people were moved by music. You know, we had a couple of musicians in our church when I was a kid, and I noticed how people were just moved by music, moved to tears, moved to excitement. And there was something about that was just very compelling for me, just watching how people were moved through this language. And I remember, you know, experiencing that when I would go south to my grandfather's church, and, you know, and just listening to music, it just made me want to be able to move people in a way. And so piano was my vehicle. I mean, I had a natural affinity to it somehow.
You know, we're going to have a wonderful time here tonight, Terrance, because things are just flowing, and I love the flow. You know, I remember how we met. That was an interesting flow. And so I'm going to ask this next question. You're talking about people and emotion, and this is a quote by you. It's all about human emotion, and that spans time and race and culture. Can you elaborate for us what you meant by that?
The fact that we all bleed, the fact that we all cry sometimes, the fact that we all, you know, want to smile and love and laugh. And I think that's true about the human race, regardless of time, generation, race, culture. And what I try to do with music is try to demonstrate that people around the world experience those same things, and artists, musicians, composers have captured those emotions in music. And, you know, whether it's Franz Schubert talking about the love that he never experienced, or whether it's Sam Cooke talking about the love that he lost, it's all about love. And even though those guys lived in two different centuries, one in the 19th century, one in the 20th century, that emotion, that wanting, that desire to be loved or to love is the same. And so even though their way of expressing it is perhaps different, and it should be different to different centuries, I like to show the connection and talk about the connection and just show through music that there is a connection between this man's love and this man's desire for love. And I think in that way, people start to break down, or the barriers between people and generations start to crumble, and we start to see ourselves as just human beings and not, black or white or red or whatever. It's just all about that human emotion.
Talking about love, let's go down that road. The classical guys, the Bach, the Chopin, Beethoven. Who among them would you say was the most romantic?
Beethoven. Whoa. Beethoven came in the Romantic period. Mm-hmm. He really kicked off the Romantic period. He was coming out of the period of the right after the French Revolution, where equality became so important, brotherhood, fraternity became important concepts, important ideas in Western Europe, and so the artist as an individual becomes more important. Mm-hmm. In the classical period, when we think of or Baroque period, when we think of Bach or Mozart or Haydn, those guys were essentially writing music for aristocrats. It wasn't about their personal emotion. It was music for entertainment, mm-hmm. music to entertain dinner parties, or breakfast, or music to highlight the lavish courts that existed in Western Europe. When Beethoven came along, it was about, I've got a personal statement. Beethoven didn't want to work for aristocrats. He didn't want to be beholden to a court. He wanted to express his own emotion. And so in that way, he embraced the Romantic spirit. So composers like Chopin, those coming after him, they were able to capitalize on the work that he did in terms of making it about human emotion. And you hear it in this music.
Mm-hmm. You think he was compelled by his period, or a strong desire to express himself or to be his own composer?
I think the period had a lot to do with mm-hmm. it. Yeah, certainly that. I mean, he was the right person at the right time.
Timeline again, Terrance. What activities were you involved in during high school?
Oh man, I was captain of the basketball team. All those years of playing piano and playing basketball with my friends kind of paid off. I mean, the work ethic of piano, carried over into my work ethic as an athlete. Mm-hmm. I played soccer in my high school soccer team. I wasn't that great. Got kicked in the shin and decided I'll just wait for basketball season. Was never really into football. That was a little too much contact for me. I went to a very small Lutheran high school. Okay. And
That's the church you belong to, Lutheran?
No, I grew up Baptist.
Protestant.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
But I was also in the school orchestra. So, between the sports and music, I had formed a choir at my high school, and I played trumpet. I didn't mention that, but I had 3 instruments: trumpet, guitar, piano, and organ. So I guess that's 4.
Wow.
And then the whole kind of choir directing. So it was all about music and sports. My brother was very insistent on me not just sitting in the house playing piano.
Your brother?
My brother, yeah. He wanted me to, because I had 1 brother and 3 sisters, and my sisters kind of coddled me in a way, and so I would make music a lot in the house. I was always the entertainment for Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, or whenever someone would come to our house, an uncle or aunt, my father would make me go in the house and play piano. Mm-hmm. My brother wanted me to have the sports thing too, and he also wanted me to be able to work on cars. And so, growing up in high school, I worked on cars. I, would change brakes and repair fenders, and so sports, cars, and music. That was my thing.
So you would say your affinity for community, your passion for community, and I come to some of those questions later on in the program. The genesis was in your home with your sisters or your siblings. you know, here are your sisters who sort of like cuddled you, but they enjoy the music that you created. And here's a brother who admired the music, respected it, but at the same time realized his younger brother needed to be well-rounded and sort of, you know, take you out there and have you interact with the community and so on.
Yes.
So you had early training, my brother.
And you know what, Selwyn?
Mm-hmm.
What I saw was that there was a disconnect in those communities, per se, because I had my friends who were interested in, you know, the music that we heard on the radio versus the guys who were interested in fast cars or cool cars. You know, so I had those peers. I had the athlete, the guys who were into the sports. Then I had my church family and the people who were into the church community. So music for me was an attempt, an opportunity to galvanize all of these communities, trying to find ways, you know, because I wanted my basketball buddies to come to church with me. I wanted those kids that played in the orchestra to come and see me play basketball. So music became a way for me to try to find a common language to show these people that, hey, here's a center, and that center is that human emotion, that human connection, and music is that one language that connects us.
Were you able to use it?
Things.
Were you able to attain that?
It's an ongoing process.
Ongoing.
It's ongoing.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I constantly work on and think about.
Well, you know, I don't know if this is a fair question that you've said so much about your beginnings, but tell us about your beginnings in music. How old were you when you first played the piano? I think you went into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I was about 8 years old.
8 years.
I was 8 years old.
And when did you begin to pursue playing the piano professionally?
No, that's tough. You know, I got my first check when I was 13. You know,
What?
I was making money at 13 playing piano.
Wow.
And by the time I was 16, I had 4 church jobs. I would go from the Lutheran church to the Holiness Church to my father's Baptist church, and I had another AME church downtown Cleveland. So it forced my parents to get me a car. So I had to have a vehicle because I had all these church gigs, man. And that was kind of nice. You know, I always had a car in high school, which allowed me to date to a degree.
In high school.
So again, it allowed me to be, I think, well-rounded, and allowed me to associate with a lot of different people from different backgrounds. You know, I had mentioned that I had gone to a Lutheran school. So some of my friends were Lutheran who had gone to the school, so they wanted a gospel choir at the Lutheran church. So I took what I was doing at my high school downtown to the Lutheran church, and we started a gospel choir there. I had a church job where it was a sanctified church, where it was very it was very challenging, in that the emotions expressed in that church were something that I was unaccustomed to. It was a bit different, and they actually fired me from that job because the pastor one day said, I really don't think that you get this thing, man, because, you know, they would speak in tongues, and it was a bit odd for me. You know, I understood the musical language, I understood the emotion of it, but it was a bit beyond me. But again, it was an attempt for me to try and use music to bring people together.
So you got fired?
I got fired. I remember sitting in the office one day between services, and he sat there with me and the other musician. I played organ, and there was a pianist. He's like, man, you're not getting it, because I wasn't the organist who would, I didn't carry the service in the way he wanted to.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just didn't know. It was out of my league. I didn't know what to do at a certain point.
You know what comes to mind, Terrance, is that here you were between all these different communities, young man, trying to use the language of music, right, to communicate with all these different communities. Sort of, and I'm gonna borrow a word that I saw in one of your write-ups, juxtapose, so to speak, the different communities, bridging these gaps. How did you manage that? How did you manage being one time on the court with your friends? There's a different kind of energy. And then being in church, the different churches. How did you How did you manage that? What was it in you then? Let me ask you this way. I think this is much more fair. What is it you think in you? What quality you possessed that made that possible for you at such an early age?
I think it was expected of me.
Okay.
It was expected of
So
me.
you rose to the occasion.
Yeah, my mother really instilled in us, and I'd say in me in particular, because I was the youngest, and because I was able to kind of see how my parents worked with my older siblings, and I was able to learn from their mistakes. And so it was always a juggling act for me and a desire to really bring these people together. I think that was the thing. So, and I think it was the desire,
Okay.
you know, a consistent urge, because I would see the similarities in these, in people of different backgrounds and different positions in life. I would see that there was some common ground, even if they couldn't see it. And so I always had a inclination and just a strong desire to be that bridge to say, hey, you know, cousin over here and friend over here, you know, even though you think you may be very different, there is something, you know, even though this friend can't play basketball at all, you know, he has no coordination whatsoever, and this friend over here does. Hey man, there's some common ground. It might not be on the playground, but there is something that can bring you all together. I mean, both of you all are my friends for some reason, and so for me, there was always this desire to enlarge my circle, to have a larger community.
You know, I want to shift gears a little, because one of the things I discovered about you is these 4 books in your library, these favorite books, and I want us to talk about them for a bit. One, The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. Makes Me Want to Holler by Nathan McCall. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now that's another powerful one by Stephen Covey. And then my boy Miles, The Autobiography by Quincy Troop. Let's start with Miles, The Autobiography. Why? What is it? What is it in these books that resonate so much with you that they make it to your top 4 list?
I read the Miles's autobiography when I was in graduate school. And in graduate school, I had, I'd say, the most traumatic experience of my life. Again, I had started playing piano when I was 8. When I went to Morehouse, I was not certain that I wanted to be a music major, and I delayed it for a couple of years. And then once I decided I wanted to pursue music, I was very steadfast. And I was in the studio all the time practicing. The school even gave me a piano for my apartment. I was just so dedicated.
Wow.
And so I never, even those couple of years where I wasn't a music major, I was always in the department playing piano. So I was really, piano was like my blanket. It was something that was with me all the time. And so when I got to graduate school, I had a hand injury working in a restaurant. And my therapist, I had 3, and they told me I couldn't play piano anymore. And that kind of caused me to question everything that I have ever done and believed in my life, because here I go from, practicing 5 or 6 hours a day to not being able to touch a piano for more than 5 minutes without my arm blowing up, swelling up. So it was devastating for me. And so I just didn't know what to do with my time. My family didn't seem to grasp what was going on. It was, because there was no obvious signs of injury. It was tendons and ligaments that were damaged. And again, the therapist told me that you'll never be able to do this again. So the first thing I did was went to Africa to just try to collect my thoughts and try to get grounded I thought if I went back home, to Africa, I don't know what might happen, but that was transformative for me. And so after I came back, I started reading books like Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Miles Davis's autobiography, because I knew that Miles had gone through some very traumatic times in his life. His, had to do a lot with drugs. And so when I read Miles's book, and I read that alongside the Seven Habits, it convinced me, just reading Miles's book convinced me that thing you talked about earlier, never giving up. Miles, man, he had it so bad that he, went to his father's house back in St. Louis and locked himself in a barn, man, I think for maybe 30 days, and his father would bring him water outside. He was trying to kick his habit, and that inspired me, just reading his story and seeing how he came out of that and seeing how he was so Miles. I mean, he was nobody but Miles Davis, and whether you liked him or not, he knew who he was. He had a strong sense of self, and he knew what he wanted. He knew the music that he wanted to make, even after, the records like Kind of Blue, when he went off into a new thing and nobody really, oh man, what's this crap Miles is doing? He was really devoted to what he did. And, man, playing classical music, I always had people in my ear saying, man, why are you playing that, man? There were always those people, saying, why are you playing that Western European music, brother? You could be playing this thing, but I knew that this music spoke to me. And I knew that this music spoke to a lot of people over generations. And it was something that I felt very deeply. And so reading Miles' story and seeing how we still listen to Miles Davis said to me that just stick to your guns, dude. Just stick to your gut. You might not be able to play piano right now, but who knows what may come out of this, Just stay with it, stay with it. And I met an older pianist who told me, oh, I had a friend who had an injury like that. Give it a couple years. This guy he was 89 at the time, and he was still touring. And for him to say, just give it a couple years sounded like a long time to me.
Right.
But coming from him, it made a lot of sense to me. And after about a year and a half, I was able to continue playing piano and finish my graduate degree. And so Miles' story just really resonated in terms of, being yourself and sticking to what you believe in, no matter what that looks like to other people.
Man, that's a good story. I wanna ask you one more question before we go on a break, and since we're talking about books, so what books or stories did you enjoy as a child?
Books or stories? Stories. I grew up in a household of storytellers. My father, again, he's a pastor, so he's got a story for everything. I enjoyed family stories. I would sit around and listen to my uncles tell stories, my grandfather tell stories. I loved history. I loved my family history. I love hearing stories about my great-grandparents and my, who, bought land in Mississippi in the 1920s and 1940s, and who, started NAACP, local organizations in Mississippi to get, black people an opportunity to vote and buy land. So I love those stories. I love those stories about my family, stories that gave me strength and courage and gave me a sense of responsibility. Those were the stories that really spoke to me.
That's a good place to take a break, my brother.
Okay.
All right. We are back with Terrance McKnight. Terrance, what was your creative journey that has brought you to where you are in your career today?
The creative journey. Well, the creative journey. It's interesting.
Is it you wanna?
How can you ask me that another?
You know what I like about this conversation here tonight is that you're so eloquent and so interesting in telling you know about your journey and so on, that you answer some of the questions that I have. So the flow is more organic than anything else, and I like that. And sit on that one for the time being, right? I want to go back to those books because I'm curious. You mentioned Miles,
Yeah.
and you mentioned reading that alongside the Seven Habits.
Yeah.
You want to dive a little bit more into the Seven Habits, or you want us to go to Makes Me Wanna Holler?
Okay, I'll say this about the Seven Habits.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple things that resonated with me at that time, and again, this was during that hand injury time.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen Covey talks about being proactive,
Yes.
and he talks about there's one story he tells where this guy wants to have this idea. He wants to do something outside. He wants to work in his yard, but then it rains. So the guy says, "Oh, well, I can't do anything now because it's raining." Stephen Covey says that's a great opportunity to organize your home. So while my hand was injured, I couldn't practice, but that didn't mean I didn't have to involve myself in music. So I started reading about music. I started listening to the radio, man. That's what I did when my hand was hurt. I really got into public radio. I was living in Georgia, and I was listening to Georgia Public Broadcasting and WABE. So I was getting all of the music that I had been practicing, that I've been learning, and I started reading more in detail about the history of the music and about the composers, and I started reading about contemporary music. So that spoke to me, being proactive. I wasn't going to let this hand thing just get me down. I wasn't going to cower, and there was a Spike had a movie around that time, Mo Better Blues, where Bleak Gilliam, the character who was a trumpet player, when he hurt his mouth, he got beat up, trying to protect Spike in the alley. And Denzel's character went to his girlfriend, and she said, "Well, Bleak, if you can't play anymore, what would you do?" And he said, "I would, go on a corner and die."
Wow.
And I thought, that's not going to be me. He didn't do that, but I wanted to be proactive. I could have taken that route. I could have felt so sorry for myself and just given up, but I wanted to be proactive, and that's what spoke to me. Stephen Covey also talked about having this desire first to understand, then to be understood. So to understand requires listening, to understand where people are coming from, to understand why they're hurting, to understand how they're hurting, what causes that hurt. Because once you understand, then you can try and administer, something. And for me, it was ministering through music, but I had to understand the issues in order to try and help to perhaps solve the issues, or assuage some of the, is that a word?
Yes.
Assuage. Yes, some of the pain. So that spoke to me. Understand, seek ye to understand first, and then be understood.
And Nathan McCall, Makes Me Wanna Holler. Why that book?
Well, I think that was given to me. Somebody just gave that book to me, and I started reading it, and it just grabbed me like right away. Nathan McCall, here he was, a guy who kind of grew up in a neighborhood that sounded similar to mine, where he made some bad choices in his life, but he overcame some of those. He saw the error of his ways, and he turned his life around. He went to school, and he went to Norfolk State, and came out, got a job working for the Atlanta Journal and Washington Post. And he talked about in this book how And this is what grabbed me about the book, and this is why I put it on my list, because he talked about riding down the street one day and getting into an argument with this guy who was willing to take his life. Nathan said this guy wanted to pull me over and basically beat me down or shoot me. He said, and the reason that guy was willing to do that over something so minor was because he didn't value himself. This guy didn't really see any value in his own life, and he looked at me, basically a mirror image, and thought, you know, what would I have to lose even if I took this guy's life? Because so it was that devaluing of their humanity that Nathan said, you know what, I'm not going to pull over and argue with this guy because I understand where this dude is coming from. I understand how through our experience in this country, this guy doesn't really see himself as being valuable. And so that spoke to me.
Wow. And the miseducation of the Negro.
On my birth certificate, it lists my parents as Negroes.
Is that so?
That's right, Negro. So I figured I'm a Negro too. And so when I went to Morehouse, this was required reading, The Miseducation of the Negro, and it just struck me like, I'm a Negro, my parents are Negroes, their parents are probably Negroes, and maybe they were all miseducated. Let me read this book. And I opened the book, and it's by Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History Week at the time, which we now celebrate for a month. And this guy, you know, he was in Harlem, man, and he was, you know, he wrote the book in the 30s, and he just talked about, you know, how the systems that were put in place to maintain American slavery, the psychological systems, the kind of brainwashing that was put in place, hadn't really been removed. So those same ideas of inferiority versus superiority versus high culture and low culture versus beauty and what's not beautiful, those hadn't really changed in our culture. Those same ideas are there. That's why that guy was willing to take Nathan McCall's life over, you know, him jumping in front of him in a lane at a traffic light, because he didn't value himself. He was taught that his culture, his mother, which is Africa, has no value. And when you think that your mother doesn't have any value, when you think that your mother is ugly, not beautiful, what does that say about you?
Yeah.
So that book was paramount. It's what Carter G. Woodson talks about, that what he talks about in that book informs everything that I do. Because for me, it's all about righting that wrong. It's all about me saying, Selwyn, man, look at your hair. It's beautiful, man. Look at that nose, man. Look at those lips. You know, look, you know, that swagger that you have, man. That's, you know, that's so unique. That's beautiful. It's just as beautiful as, you know, my colleagues at WNYC or WQXR. Is just as valid. You know, your viewpoint, your background is just as valid. Your culture is just as rich. And that's what Carter G. Woodson talks about, that's not being talked about in our communities. You know, so we still have, and I still think out there is this mentality where we don't value our mother, and that mother being Africa. And I think, you know, I think that's critical. I mean, because when I talk about Western European music all the time, it's classical music and it's European music. And, you know, I sit there and I listen to it, and I listen to my listeners listen to it, and they come out and they support it, and they see the value in it. They see how significant it is, how it informs who they are. And we have that same thing, except in order for slavery to have worked in this country around the diaspora as well, we had to cut the tie. You know, there was that door of no return. But once we returned to that door, and that's why I went to Africa when I hurt my hand, because I wanted to see my mama. I wanted to see why I was beautiful. I wanted to get some direction. And so that book was #1 on my list, and I say that people need to read it, because once you read it, you can see some of the things that happen in our society. How this brother was killed yesterday in North Carolina, and Charlotte, I think he was in an accident, had gone up to somebody's door, and this woman thought he was coming to kick her door down. He was there because he was hurt. He was looking for help, but she looked at him and saw this big ex-football player and thought he must, you know, be here to rob me. And he was shot. But so my work is always about you know, showing that our culture is valuable and showing that we are beautiful, just as beautiful as anybody else. Not better than anybody else, but we're all human. We all bleed, and we all cry, and we all want to love, and we're all beautiful. So that's what Carter G. Woodson talks about, and that's what resonates with me every day.
Back to music. Huh? Do you compose any pieces?
I have. I don't. But I did when I was doing my church work.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I had to write for, service sometimes. And I took, music composition in school, and I had to write for that.
Okay. So what does it mean to work at WQXR and have the audience you have?
It's dreamy. It's dreamy. And I call my mother once a week, and I say, Mom, this is you. You did this, I said, you gave me the tools to do this job. You gave me the humanity. You gave me the love for people. You gave me the love for music. You gave me the work ethic to be able to pull this off. She was the one who took, my father supported it. He was in the background paying for it, and he, if I wanted lessons, whatever, but my mother she was the driving force. She was the one who I would sit in the kitchen and listen to her talk to those people from various backgrounds, different ages, cousins, friends, strangers. And she would talk to them all the same, man. She would treat them all with love. Mm-hmm. And so when I get on the mic at QXR, I don't know who my listeners are. They're here in New York City, but they're around the world. And what I want them to hear in my voice is inclusion. I don't want anybody to feel like Terrance isn't talking to me or Terrance is talking down to me. Mm-hmm. I want them to feel that, man, I want to sit at this table with Terrance because you know what? He gets it. He gets the fact that we're all human, the fact that we are all connected, the fact that I might be hurting today, but maybe he'll say something to make me feel a little better, regardless of who I am. I want everybody to feel inclusive. And QXR uniquely gives me that opportunity because of the city that we're in, because of the diverse nature of the city, the various ethnic groups in the city. It gives me a very unique opportunity, and it's a dream job, man.
So what is the most interesting audience for who you have performed? Playing, piano. What is the most interesting audience you've ever performed in front of? You've done so many.
Most interesting.
Yeah.
I just really thought back to that Sanctified Church.
Okay.
That was a very interesting experience because they were looking for magic to come out of that organ, man. They knew what it sounded like. They knew what they, wanted to hear. And so it was such a challenge, trying to give them what they wanted. And so I found that very interesting because these people looked a lot like me.
Right.
They lived in my neighborhood, but their kind of musical vocation, their interest it forced me to grow in a way that I had never really thought about before. So I'd have to say that. Versus, when you play for an audience that's used to Beethoven or Chopin, they know the music.
Right.
They know what Beethoven's, 14th sonata sounds like. And you just have to give them that with, some personality. But this Sanctified Church, they always wanted something very fresh and something that was going to, invigorate the spirit. And so for me, that was very interesting experiment in how to fail.
What is your personal process of learning a new piece?
I'm thinking about the last. I learn pieces now for a different reason than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, pianists or musicians learn pieces because it's for a job or a gig
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is the standard repertoire that you're expected to be able to play. I learned a piece. The last piece that I sat down and learned was a piece for voice and piano by this woman, Florence Price, who was the first woman of African descent to have a symphony performed by a major orchestra. Florence Price was born in 1886, and she grew up in Arkansas. Somewhere. Was she in Arkansas, man? I forgot. I'm losing the story. Anyway, the Chicago Symphony played her piece in 1932. And Florence had written a piece when she had her first child. It was called For My Little Son. And the piece hadn't been recorded, but I wanted to make this piece a part of a show that I created. Mm-hmm. And so I had to learn the piano part. And so my process for learning that piece was a bit different because I knew so much about Florence before I knew about the piece of music. And so when I went into this piece, I knew that this son had died shortly after his birth. And so I learned the music before I learned the notes. I knew the language that she was trying to communicate before the notes, before I had to actually kind of figure out the notes. And the notes, once I started fooling around with the notes just took care of themselves because the music was already there. And so I had a piano teacher who told me that once, and I thought that was the most bizarre thing. He said, don't worry about the notes. Why are you so worried about these notes? Learn the music and the notes will take care of themselves. And I thought,
that's interesting.
I was like, man, that's an assignment. That's beyond my pay grade. But when I went to learn this piece by Florence and I knew what she was up against and I knew her background and I knew that she was this lady who could have passed during Jim Crow, but she elected not to. I knew the music that I felt like I knew the music that she wanted to make in talking about this kid, the joy that she experienced. It wasn't all joy though, because it was partly joy of her bringing this newborn into the world, but she was bringing in this newborn during Jim Crow segregation. So there was a bit of lamentation on her part, And so I understood the music and I just had to put the notes to it. So that was my process. Wow. Before that, I learned Intermezzo by Brahms. Mm-hmm. And Brahms wrote this thing, man. He had retired. He had said that he didn't have any more music in him. And again, see, I'm juxtaposing. I'm making connections between human emotion. Mm-hmm. Brahms wrote this piece in 1886, or he retired in 86, so around 1890 he wrote this piece. And his many of his closest friends were, gone, were deceased, and he was just very lonely. And he came back out of retirement because he heard this clarinetist that inspired him to write some more music. He came back out and he wrote this piece, man, these intermezzos and these little piano pieces that were so intimate. And I went through, this period in my life where I needed something. I needed music as a balm. Mm-hmm. And I thought, who is as lonely as I am? Out of all the musicians that I've known through history, who would have written something to respond to how I feel in this moment? And I was like, Johannes Brahms did it because he was feeling very destitute at this time. And so I sat to the piano, man, and the notes kind of took care of themselves.
Wow. Let me just jump to the chat room. Carl asked, do you have a way of validating your mother's Africa's music in your professional life? If so, how?
Do I have a way of validating?
Your mother's, meaning Africa's, music in your professional life? If so, how?
Absolutely. Carl. Well, oftentimes on my show,
Uh-huh.
I'll play music from West Africa, the Kora, the Mbira. I know some griot musicians who represent 22, 23 generations of music making in their family, so who can trace the music back to the 16th century, And so in my programs, I demonstrate through sound how the African music, how the kora, how the complex rhythms of that music influence not only African American music, but it influenced Western European music. If you listen to Scarlatti, Scarlatti, Baroque harpsichordist, keyboard player. If you listen to Scarlatti next to some of that, kora music from Senegal or from Mali, you're going to hear so many similarities. You're going to hear the same kind of complexities and polyrhythms and counterpoint. And so you get a sense that there was, even though there was this door of no return,
Right.
even though that there was this, pressing down of African culture, you get the sense that somebody was influenced by this music and that the musics were in communication across the ocean.
When you talk about that, the person that comes to mind, a musician, a singer, is Umu Sangare. I mean, I love to listen to her music, and it has a lot of those rhythms that you talk about, which I really love. This is an interesting question by Carl. And Carol asks, what do you like about Miles? I guess Miles Davis.
I like that Miles. Well, his music, first of all, man. If you listen to that horn, it's so seductive. And Miles, he was fearless musically. As a human being, he was fearless, man, and he had a perspective and a point of view, and he inspired so many folks. He went to Juilliard, and then he decided he was gonna try another route, and he did that very successfully. And he was always evolving. That's the thing about Miles, man. He never, he was into the classics as well as into, modern kind of Western European music. And he was unafraid to approach it. And he was unafraid to try to find the connections between that music and his own, voice that was influenced by this country. And he didn't get stuck in one style of music. He just continued to evolve and continued to work with all types of musicians, fusion musicians, rock musicians. So again, as I tried bridging, gaps, bridging communities of musicians and athletes, Miles was doing the same thing with musicians. He was able to play with anybody. That's what I loved about Miles.
I'm going to challenge you with this one sentence, right? Just one sentence if you can answer this, because we talked about love. You talked about love and using music as a language to connect different people. How would you describe your relationship with the piano or to the piano?
On a good day, it's an extension of me.
Huh.
On a good day, like if I practice, I can go into a studio and touch a piano and, it'll play. So, and it always, all of my family is in Ohio, in Cleveland. And so for me, the piano is a way of remembering, of connecting me back to my family. I can go to the piano and, play What a Friend We Have in Jesus in my father's favorite key. I can play, those old songs that my grandmother used to like to listen to, and it brings me closer to my family, even though I'm, hundreds of miles away. Even though my grandmother died 5 years ago, playing that music connects me back to those people and back to myself in a way. So the piano is that, for me, it's that vehicle that connects myself and to my family.
Like that. Which classical composer, to name a few, Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Mozart, Brahms, you just mentioned him, do you most admire, and why?
I'd have to say Beethoven. I always say Beethoven.
Beethoven?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because he was like Miles. He had his perspective, and he wasn't gonna kowtow. He wasn't about, he liked money, but he wasn't gonna, he wasn't going to commercialize his music for money. Beethoven, when he was 31, realized that he was losing his hearing. When I was 33, I had lost the use of my left hand for a while. Beethoven realized he was losing his hearing, man, and he, was on the verge of suicide. And he wrote a letter to his brothers saying, I want you to have this, and I want this brother to have this, and he goes on through the letter, and he talks about the only reason that he doesn't take his own life is because he felt that his creator had given him something to say, and he wanted to get all of that communication out.
That's
He felt that his art, next to God, the highest thing was his art. And reading about him, and knowing how he was ostracized, castigated, talked about, when he went to Vienna, man, they said he was rough and that his piano playing style was, wasn't polished enough. His music, even though a lot of his music was loved at the time, they thought it was just too bizarre, too radical. A lot of the critics and writers, they just thought he was too far gone. Singers were walking up his rehearsals. This is unplayable. This is unsingable. He'd write music and he'd have to say, well, this is for 120 years later. You can't understand. This is for 1940. People will understand it in 1940. He wrote music that was that far advanced. And then he was so much about brotherhood and equality. Napoleon was his nemesis. The Bonaparte family wanted to hire Beethoven, but after Napoleon kind of, propped himself up as a self-appointed monarch and emperor, Beethoven, just, didn't want anything to do with that kind of ideology. And so his Ninth Symphony was all about brotherhood and fraternity.
The Ninth Symphony?
Yeah, it's all about that. It was based on a Schiller poem talking about brotherhood and fraternity.
Wow.
And so that, and so in that regard, he became my 19th century kind of go-to guy.
How do you believe your love and passion for music connects you with your audience while playing the piano or any other musical instrument?
Well, I'll say that I don't play piano so much anymore.
Really?
Because of my radio work, man. It's all about communicating through radio and these shows. So I don't know, Salman. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that what my conviction is to try. That's what I do every day. Just try. I don't know how it strikes the ears of my listeners.
Right.
I just know that, I try to do the right thing for my heart, and I try to, center that and try to stay centered and try to stay humble, and respectful, and just try to do the right thing regardless of the changes that are happening around us. I just try to, keep that same center that my mother and my father, my grandfather, my great father, all those people that came before me had. And so however it comes across to the listeners, I take responsibility in that, but I do know that I'm trying to come from the right place here.
I through my writings, I write inspirations every day on Facebook through my writings, through my show. I am always trying to connect people through inviting people to tell their stories, tell their life journeys, and so on. And what inspires me is because I believe that we are more alike than different. And in that endeavor, I hope that these similarities come out in some way or the other. But I have a passion for connecting people because of that. Is that does that sound similar to what drives you? Because you love to connect people and you're doing a good job at it. Is that what is that part of what drives you?
When I was in first grade, there was an incident in which there was a kid in my class. His name was very similar to mine. And my first grade teacher said, his name was Terrance, and our last name began with MC. Mick. We were both Terrance Mix. And our teacher said, I want one of you guys to go. Your names are too much alike. Second week of school. I'm 6 years old. Your names are too much alike, and I want one of you all to go to another classroom. Which one of you all wants to go? And we sat there like this, looking around. I don't want to go. And so she said, well, if you won't volunteer, we'll let the class vote. And so she sent us outside the classroom, and I heard her say Terrance McKnight. And I heard her call the other student's name. And she came out the door and she said, Terrance, I want you to come in the classroom and get your things, get your coat and get your books, and you're going to go down to room 108 to Miss Robinson's class. And we walked back in the classroom, and the kids applauded, and Terrance grabbed his things and he walked out of the room like this. And we were never friends through elementary school, through junior high school. Through high school was always a weird dynamic, and I felt his pain, man. And I never wanted anybody to feel that. I never wanted to feel that myself, and I never wanted anybody to feel that based on something that I said or did. So that inspires me all the time. I don't, that affected me, watching my classmate feel, whatever he felt in that moment, and so that inspires me all the time.
Wow.
And that's why I think that education is so important. And again, I taught at Morehouse for 10 years, and so I wanted to be a good educator. I taught piano. I taught music appreciation. I taught music theory.
Huh.
Yeah.
I see a quote here. I see myself as the connective tissue between the station and the community.
Yep.
It's a two-way process.
Yeah.
Why is that important?
I moved to Harlem my second year in New York City because my heroes, man, growing up, Ellington and Thelonious Monk, and Diz, and all these guys, man, came through Harlem. Carter G. Woodson, Marcus Garvey, all these guys, Malcolm, all those guys, man, all those guys, Adam Clayton Powell, they were all in Harlem, and these were guys that my older siblings talked about. So these were the men that I aspired to be like, to have a voice, to have a perspective, to have some courage. And so when I moved to New York, I moved to Brooklyn initially, but then I moved to Harlem because I wanted to tell their stories. I wanted to connect Harlem to the work that I was doing at WNYC and WQXR. So one of the first specials I did was on this woman who was Adam Clayton Powell's wife, Hazel Scott. She was a pianist who went to Juilliard when she was 8 years old, and she and her mother moved to New York, to Harlem from Trinidad. And she just had this wonderful story. She was a pianist who played both classical and jazz. She was the first black woman to have a television show. Hazel Scott's her name, man. And,
Wow.
And kind of after she died around 1980, it was 80 or 82, people kind of forgot about Hazel. She had lived in Paris for a while, but she was such an important figure because she, too, like Adam Clayton Powell, they were all about, uplifting the black community. Not above anybody, but just uplifting us to show our beauty. And so I wanted to tell her story. I wanted to tell the stories of these Harlemites and to connect that community, because I felt that there weren't enough of those stories being told. And so that was kind of the impetus for me moving to Harlem.
What should be the relationship between a host and the community they serve?
I think a representative. I think, I kind of look at myself, sometimes I get an opportunity, always honored to go to the Schomburg, and host events at the Schomburg, because it gives me a chance to speak to that community and represent our station. It's a public radio station that I work for. And we are the public in Harlem. And so it gives me a chance to demonstrate and to show that, hey, Harlem is important to the work and to the values, to the core values of the station that I work for. Harlem is important to New York Public Radio, and New York Public Radio is important to Harlem. So I see myself as that connective tissue between the two, and I think, I'm honored to have that place.
Terrance, I have some questions that I want to bring out. I want to ask you to bring out some of your passion, like jazz and classical music and so on. So we're going to go a little rapid fire, right? I'm going to ask you, you give me some answers, because I want to get these questions in. I want our audience to get a more multidimensional perspective of who you are and what you do. All right, so I got to get these in.
I'm nervous.
No, man, don't be nervous.
Does that give me perspective?
Terrance. Normal Terrance. No.
Rapid fire.
Why do you believe people still find classical music relevant?
Because it is.
I like that. What does classical music most appeal? Who does classical music most appeal to, and why?
The people that listen to it.
Okay, teacher. How do you get potential audience interested in your programming?
You should show them a reflection of themselves.
Tell us about your relationship with jazz.
Love it. It's improvisational. It's a big part of who I am and the way I operate in the world.
If you were introducing someone to jazz, who or what would you play for them or advise they listen to?
I would start at the beginning. I have them listen to Buddy Bolden. I talked to them about Buddy Bolden. We'd go listen to Scott Joplin. We listen to Joplin, and we listen to spirituals and the music that kind of, the blues. I mean, the music that kind of led into jazz and classical music too, because it had a part to play in it.
What do you listen to these days?
Whatever I'm working on, man. Whatever the next big thing is, that's what I'm studying.
How would you recommend others pursue their dream in music?
Learn the fundamentals.
Do you ever get nervous in front of an audience?
I don't.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah, I don't. Anxious.
Oh, anxious, you do?
Yeah, anxious. But I'm excited about doing it. Not nervous.
Not nervous. 2008, I think you came to WNYC FM New York from Georgia Public Radio. Do you find that there is a difference in musical tastes between your audience in Georgia and New York?
No.
No, okay. Okay. What are some similarities between the two stations, if any? And what is different?
Man, it's hard for me to remember. I'm so...
That's good.
Like, it's hard to remember.
That's good.
You know why? Because I've been about what I've been about. I've been about what I've been about. And what I do here in New York is what I did in Georgia.
I like that.
And what I did in Georgia is what I did growing up. And it's all about connecting people. So I don't know. I just put it out there. I'm not sure how it's received. I still have a job. I guess it's going okay. So, but I just do what I do. I mean, I'm like Miles. Miles played what Miles wanted to play. Beethoven played what Beethoven wanted to play. You know, how people received it, how people receive it, I'm not sure, but I've got a voice, and that's the only voice I know.
I like that. What surprised you most about WQXR?
Man, what surprised me most is the depth of our listenership and how entrenched, how much they know, how, you know, our listeners, man, they've been listening a lot to this station a long time, many of our listeners, and they know the music and they know the history, and they really are very passionate about it, and I love that because it matches my own passion.
How did your audience respond to you when you first arrived?
Oh, I think they were a little nervous.
They were.
You know, I think they were a little nervous because they, you know, I was new, you know, and I wasn't a New Yorker. It wasn't an insider thing. I was coming from the outside, and, you know, there was a Times piece that came out right before I came, and, you know, talked about what I was going to do. And I remember I had a meeting with a guy, and he said, I'll still be able to hear Haydn quartets, right? I was like, yeah, man. Maybe not the whole quartet. Maybe I'll mix the movement with something else, but certainly you'll be able to hear your Haydn. So I think there was a little bit of anxiety on the part of my listeners, but, you know, they were just so welcoming, man. I always thank them for inviting me and having me into their homes, because they were just very, very wonderful.
If you could go back and change something related to your education or training, what would you change, or what would you do differently?
I would have stuck with that sanctified church a little longer. I would have fought for that. You know, I would have stayed in there and kind of learned that language a little. Yeah, I would have toughened up, man. I chickened out. You know, I let him talk me out of that job.
Really?
Yeah.
So there's a question in the chat room. Before I go there, I want to ask you this. What is one of your favorite quotes that inspires you?
A quote that inspires me? That's not my own?
That's not your own, yes.
Hazel Scott said, be yourself and the rest is easy.
Give me one of yours, Terrance.
This is rapid fire, huh?
It is. I like the answers.
I say, can I come back to that one?
Sure.
One of my
Why not, buddy?
quotes for
Why
myself.
not? Let me slip to the chat room, Carl.
You know what?
Uh-huh.
I've got one.
Go ahead.
I'm going to take this on because it was my grandmother's. And my grandmother, she was 96 at the time when I got the job in New York. And I called her. She was in Mississippi. I said, Grandma, I got this, I'm going to take this job in New York, which means I'm, you know, not going to be able to get here as often. But, you know, I'm going to still come see you. She said, yeah, I know, baby. I said, well, you got any advice for me? She said, no, I have no advice for you, son. And I held the phone. I guess she figured I wasn't going to let her go. So after about 40 seconds, she said, well, I guess if I had some advice, it would be, when you get up there, if you got something to say, you get out in the middle of the road and you say it. Don't go hiding behind no bush.
Wow. Wow.
If you have something to say, you get out there and you say it. Get out in the middle of the road and you say it.
I like that.
Don't hide behind no bush.
I like that.
And so the first piece I played on WNYC when I got here was a spiritual. Because that's what I had to say. It was about equaling. It was about showing the beauty of my culture and showing what I was about. And that music described what I was about. And the music talked about, no matter the circumstances, no matter the changing world around me, I'm going to stick to my conviction. I'm going to stick to what I believe in. And then underneath that music, I mixed Beethoven, because that's what Beethoven was about. So now I'm juxtaposing the spiritual with Beethoven, putting them on equal playing field.
Wow.
That was what I had to say.
Wow.
So that's one of the favorite things that I like thinking about. And it's, you know, it's a constant reminder.
I like Grandma's advice. I love it. I love it. I'm going to borrow that. Carl said, what surprised you most about CWS this year?
how warm it is. I mean, it's, it's surprising. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but the colors, man, the colors in the room, and just the vibe is very comfortable.
Thank you, sir.
It feels like an environment I would create, only better.
Always better. I like that. And Patrick said, asked, how do you think self-love, as you talked about earlier in terms of Mother Africa, is expressed in the current music scene?
Patrick?
Yes.
Is that who asked that question?
Patrick, yes.
Patrick, I'm not that well versed in the current music scene.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the music that I deal with is music of the past, even the jazz music. So I can't really speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a sense that he's talking about like non-art music. I have a feeling that he's talking about more about like commercial music.
Bro, I'm not sure. I'm sure.
Now, if we're talking about art music, art music oftentimes, in the music that I deal with on my station, deals with, the past. It deals with history. It deals with fables and, stories about culture being beautiful or about culture being challenging. It deals with, there's a piece that was written by a modern composer dealing with 9/11 recently. And he's talking about, he has voices of, from people who were relatives and letters. And so, again, it's about, most of the music that I deal with and play on my show is a look at the culture, look back at culture.
Okay, reflection.
Yeah, and it's not, a lot of the commercial music is for commercial purposes. So it's driven to make money, and that's not necessarily what I do so much.
Are you working on any music project right now?
Yeah, but it's kind of,
Okay.
I can't really
I got it.
talk so much about it.
I got it. Finish this sentence. The best part of Sunday evening is?
Dinner.
Okay. Do you have a particular practice to relieve stress?
A particular practice to relieve stress. What would I be stressed about?
I don't know. I mean, if there is any.
No stress.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. And what is next for Terrance?
Next for Terrance, I don't concern myself about next so often.
Okay.
Next for me is I got a show in the Green Space Thursday night where I'm talking about religion, spirituality, Africa, and the plays of August Wilson.
Is this Thursday night?
This is this Thursday night.
On WQXR?
In the Green Space on Charlton Street.
Where is it?
It's on Charlton, 44 Charlton, near the Holland Tunnel. That's it's the on the ground floor of WNYC and WQXR. Okay. It's our live event space.
What time?
It's at I believe it's a 7:00 start.
7:00.
Yeah. So we're talking about August Wilson's 10-play cycle, and we're talking about how he deals with religion, spirituality, and Africa in those plays. And so I'm hosting a panel discussion on that.
Oh, that should be interesting. What do you look forward to on weekends?
I look forward to, I'm on air Friday nights. So Saturdays I look forward to relaxing, man. I look forward to, in the summer I spend a lot of time out on my deck. I just go out there and just enjoy the sun, and I got some tomatoes and peppers.
Oh, really?
Basil growing outside. So I look forward to just relaxing and catching up with my family and my friends. Because I work evenings, I do a lot of my communicating with family on the weekends, just catching up with my own personal business.
And last but not least, the question I ask every guest: what makes you laugh out loud?
Oh, what makes me laugh out loud? the unexpected, you know. Maybe, you know, doing something goofy myself. Just something completely unexpected. I don't think there's any formula. I'm trying to think of the last time that I laughed out loud.
You remember, I don't know if this is the last time, but I think we can share this with the audience. When I was, when we were on the phone, and this cracked me up, and I asked you, we were trying to get some sense of what we can put in your ad, you know. And I said to you, well, Terrance, if I met you for the first time, and I said to you, I'm in love with the classics, what would you say?
That's right.
You want to tell them the answer?
So ask me the question again.
So Terrance, if I met you for the first time,
yeah,
and I said to you, Terrance, I'm in love with the classics, what would you say?
What's wrong with you, man?
I thought this was the last question, but there's one in the chat room. And Ali said, hold on. Let me get to it. Ali said, I'm filled with pride that a brother could represent so credibly and with such a wealth of knowledge at a classical radio station, no less. What a breath of fresh air.
Thank you, Ali.
Yes. Thank you, Ali.
Thanks, Carl.
Terrance, could you take us out, my brother, with some words of wisdom? I mean, you've given us a few, but, you know, here's your opportunity to give us another one or two.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to what you said, man, earlier. You know, if you have, you know, something that you believe in, something that you're trying to do, no matter, you know, how outrageous other people say that it might be, no matter how you know, far-fetched that idea may be, if you believe in it, just go for it, you know, and find a mentor, find somebody to, you know, be close to you and to, you know, be encouraging to somebody else. And if you got something to say like that, just say it. Get out in the middle of the road and you say it. And, you know, whatever happens, happens. But at least you know that in the end, when you go to bed at night, that you tried, you know. And if your heart is centered and you're doing it out of
I don't think you heard me. I said arrowhead.
Of love, you can't go wrong.
Thank you, sir.
Do it out of love. That's it.
You know, I want to say thank you very much for coming. You were very candid and eloquent. I learned a lot tonight, and you have a new fan. You know, I feel there's so much more to learn. I can only imagine what your audience experienced. So rich in history, so rich in your knowledge of the classics and so on. I sat here and enthralled when you were talking about Beethoven and what he, you know, sticking to what he believed in, and that whole twist about you know, believing in brotherhood and love and so on. You know, I never thought of that in the classics. I mean, you could tell that I didn't read much about Beethoven and these guys, and so this was an education for me. And it was so easy. It was so smooth. Thanks. thanks for your words of wisdom. That if I can quote your grandmother, the best I can remember is that if you have something to say, go in the middle of the street or wherever and say it out loud. Don't hide in the bushes. I think that is important. That, to me, juxtaposed, I'll borrow another one of your words, juxtaposed with having an idea and believing in it and pursuing it, but also having people around you who believe in you, who can tell you the truth, but also know when to shut up or when to be quiet and allow you to just become or to be. I think that's very important. And so, Terrance, my brother, thank you again for coming. It was beautiful.
Thanks for having me, man.
You're welcome.
All right.
Good night.
All right, good night.
Suffer the little children to come unto me. Every day, more than 30,000 children around the world die of preventable diseases. More than 300,000 children are being used in war as child soldiers. Lord have mercy. A child should be loved. A child should be held. A child should be clean. A child shouldn't smell. A child shouldn't go to bed hungry at night. A child should be taught wrong from right. A child should learn to say thanks and please. A child shouldn't suffer from preventable disease. A child is a fruit that shouldn't be picked before it's time. To do that to a child